Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on the fires burning in Southern California. I think right off the bat, we'll just talk about Palisades fire and then we'll briefly look at Eaton at the end. And then throughout this video, we'll be covering the red flag warning with the kind of critical fire danger that's on the way. So Palisades, 23,000 acres, 14% containment. But as I always say in these videos, those numbers don't really tell us all that much. Acreage doesn't really tell us all that much because most of that number burned days ago. And if we actually look at the heat detections right now, we're not seeing any heat detections at the moment on the Palisades fire. That's another reason why the containment doesn't really tell us all that much either. You look at 14%, that seems like it's not that good yet. But for the second day in a row, we look at the satellite imagery, and you can't even tell where the fires are because there's no smoke coming off of them because they haven't really been active. So it is possible to have 14% containment, but very little fire activity actually going on. So I think throughout the course of this video, the main point I'm going to make is the fires themselves, both Palisades, Eaton, we could scroll up there, you're not seeing any heat detections there, Kenneth, Hearst, we're not seeing any heat coming off of these fires right now, but then the worry is the fact that we have pretty windy conditions as of right now. We've already started to see that come up, and then there's extreme fire danger through 6 p.m. Wednesday. So that's the summary. Now let's kind of get into the weeds a bit. So we'll look at the Palisades fire first. I think the first thing we could do is look at the progression of this fire. You can see how most of the activity recently has been on this northeastern side. We're very worried about Mandeville Canyon, but we haven't seen it actually extend through those structures since we were watching it very closely. I believe that was Saturday morning. It was threatening all those structures in there. And then the other spot was because of the northerly winds, which was trying to push this fire down towards the south. This was about as sketchy of a situation as you could have. But look how the fire perimeter just bumps right up to where we have those structures, but it doesn't actually go through there. So amazing work done by the firefighters on that one. One other spot that we were a little worried about, I think it's actually easier to see on our Google Earth imagery. So we'll zoom in up here. And what they had done on this northern side of the fire was they'd actually used, I believe it's a road right there. If you look closely, you can see that white line. They used that as kind of their point to start a firing operation. And then that fire, because of the wind, burned into the main fire. So then it wasn't just the main fire rushing up over this hill and then coming down into where we have thousands of structures over there. The one concern was where it did slop over that line that they used right there, that road. But it looks like they handled that. We haven't seen that grow anytime recently. And one way we can actually prove that point that I just made, that we haven't seen much growth recently, is if we go back to the map that we were looking at on January 9th. Again, wild that we're talking about fires this large and destructive in January, but that's what happens when Southern California doesn't get much rain and the fuels stay very dry, and then you have extremely windy conditions. That's what it looked like on the 9th. And then this is the map we were looking at on the 12th. So yeah, most of that growth was up towards the north and northeast right there, where it threatened Mandeville Canyon on the eastern side. And then look what happens when I click on the most recent perimeter. So you're seeing some of that scattered heat perhaps on the inside of the fire. That could be some smoldering that's going on. But notice that red line on the outside of the fire doesn't move at all. As in the last day, doesn't really look like there's been any growth on this fire whatsoever. So that's exactly what we want to see. That's some good news there. The other thing that we like to see is, although there's structures, again with the orange dots right there, although there are structures all around that eastern side from Mandeville Canyon down to the Santa Monica area, normally when I click this button right here that says Modus and Veers, that's what picks up some of the heat detections, you'll see red stars on this map for heat in the last 12 hours. You don't see any of those. We don't even see any of the yellow stars, which means heat in the last 24 hours. So it basically looks like the fires are out at this point. Now, I'm always hesitant to say that because you can always get smoldering, which flares up if maybe some really windy conditions come in, but they've had a lot of people in there. We could actually see how many people they've had in there going in and taking advantage of these favorable conditions we've had and what they call mopping up the fire. Over 5,000 personnel have been attacking this thing, taking advantage of this little break we had in the weather before the extreme winds come back. So now let's get into the weather forecast, because that is where, everything about the fires right now, I would say is good news in terms of current conditions and how much fire activity we have right now. Current conditions as in how much fire activity we have right now. Where some of the bad news comes in is the weather forecast moving forward, and especially what's circled in that purple. That's where you have a particularly dangerous situation. That's about as bad as a red flag warning can get. I haven't seen any indications that this is going to be as bad of an event as what we had when the Palisades fire first started in terms of wind speeds. But anytime you have a PDS, that means it's quite critical out there. So I could zoom in here so you can actually see where that PDS is in relation to our fires. It looks like it does cover the northern half of the Eaton fire, and then it's very close to the western portion of the Palisades fire. But it does look like the Palisades is at least a little bit sheltered from the most extreme winds, which would, it's still under a red flag, so there's still the potential of something flaring back up, but it does look like the strongest winds are outside of the Palisades fire, so we might be getting maybe a little sheltering right there. Now we can actually look at some of the observations on the ground. So these are actual weather stations, just to see how windy it is out there right now. Looks like up in the higher elevations, we already have some 30 to 40 mile per hour gusts. That one says its max gust today was 52 miles per hour. And then closer towards the Palisades fire, once again, it looks like it is that western side where we have some of the stronger winds. It's blowing at 29 miles per hour right now, but the max gust, which was most likely earlier this morning, that was 47 miles per hour. And then we always look at minimum relative humidity as well. See that 14%? That means it was very dry throughout the day today, so that's going to dry out the fuels even more than they already are. But also the max RH was only 21%. So that means it was a very poor overnight recovery. What you usually like to see is overnight, you get a cool down, so then your relative humidity goes up, and then some of that moisture finds its way into the fuels. You'd like to see this go up to 60, 70%, but this has been something that's been consistent on this fire. It's been staying dry not only in the afternoons, but in the nights as well. Then we'll just read this, and then we'll look at a map to try to visualize what this is talking about. This is the actual incident action plan that's put together. This is signed by their incident meteorologist that's on this. So you know this is about as good as it gets in terms of your red flag warning forecast right here. Through the operational period, critical fire weather conditions can be expected with gusty north to northeast winds and low relative humidity. It's what we were just talking about, windy and dry. The gusty winds this morning will diminish a bit this afternoon. So that goes along with what we were saying about how it was over 40 miles per hour this morning, but it does seem like it's pulled back slightly right about now, but will become stronger late tonight. The strongest winds can be expected across the western half of the fire, basically branch 7. Therefore, a red flag warning is in effect. So what he's talking about right there, western portion of the fire, is that little tip of the Palisades fire that's close to where that PDS is. And he also mentioned branch 7. If we want to look at the branches that we have here, branch 7 is over here. While we're here, you can also see anywhere where that red line is, that's where they're still technically calling it uncontained. Where you have that black line is where they're saying there is containment. But as always, I take containment with a grain of salt, because when you look at the heat detections, there's been nothing for over 48 hours, it seems like. And then continuing to read right here, from Tuesday through Wednesday, moderate to strong north to northeast winds will continue across the area. The strongest winds are likely on Tuesday morning. So that's the key spot that we're going to look at on the map, with gusts in excess of 60 miles per hour possible in the windier spots, especially across branch 7. Once again, branch 7 is this western side of the fire right there. That is closest to where we have that particularly dangerous situation shown in purple there. Coming back to this, finishing it up, with relative humidity remaining low, widespread critical fire weather conditions will continue with the red flag warning in place until 6 p.m. on Wednesday. So now let's look at what kind of conditions we're expecting. So right there, that actually perfectly paints the picture of the PDS that the National Weather Service drew. And again, the strongest winds are going to be coming in tonight. So see how it's more up towards the north and the northwest of the Palisades fire. When we look in right here, Palisades fire would be right about there. Some of those stronger winds do start to filter down towards where the western side of the fire would be, but clearly the strongest winds are well up to the north and the northwest over here, already about 30 to 40 miles per hour. So now let's see what happens as we go into tonight. That's 7 p.m. Actually looks like the winds decrease by 7 p.m. See how it's that red to purplish color? And if we click into the bullseye, 45 miles per hour, 7 p.m., it turns into that orangish color mostly, which is a decrease in winds. Really weak winds across the eastern part of our fire, which is, again, where we did have the largest concern on this. So it does look like we're still getting some of that sheltering around Mandeville Canyon and that southern area that was threatened on Saturday morning. Now let's get into the overnight hours, because that's supposed to be when this event really starts to pick up. So that's 4 a.m. You start to see it pick up right there. And then 7 a.m., 10 a.m., maybe becomes a bit more widespread. And that's 1 p.m. So, that's kind of interesting. I'm not going to lie, that doesn't look as bad as I was expecting it to. With that being said, that's still very windy conditions, and it's exceptionally dry out there, so you actually don't need it to be that windy in order for, I would say what I'm more concerned about right now would be a new fire popping up, as opposed to some of these older ones flaring back up, just because there's been so many people on these fires, and that they've been working hard to mop up, as well as drop more retardant on it when it hasn't really even been that active, making sure that border is secured. So clicking through there, it's definitely going to be windy, and it also mentioned dry overnight, so that's something else we can look at. 6 p.m., 10 p.m., let's see if we have any recovery. Yeah, we're just not seeing that humidity number go up at all. And then by 7 a.m., by 10 a.m., it's already dropping back down into the teens. So definitely a critical weather forecast right there. The good news, we could say, is that by Friday, offshore winds will end up bringing cooler temperatures and higher humidity levels. I think that's a mistake. I think they meant to say onshore winds right there, because it's the offshore winds that are bringing these drier conditions in. It's onshore winds that would start to push in some of the moisture from the ocean. And, let's just click into Friday. See if that's the case. Yeah, you can see some of that wind. You start to see those wind streams going that way. That's a little bit more onshore. And then you finally see that relative humidity bump up to 60%. So when I see that, what I'm thinking is it's going to be windy overnight tonight and into tomorrow. Really, it's still windy through Wednesday, I'll say. And it's still dry through Wednesday. But as long as we can keep these fires from flaring back up, which, that I got some hope that's going to work out. And as long as no new fires start, then we're actually finally going to see a change in this weather pattern that's been plaguing Southern California for quite a while now. So once those winds start to turn onshore, looks like more as we get into Friday, that's where the winds actually calm down, and then we start to see more of that humidity pushing in over our fires, and that's going to feel a lot more like what January should feel like this time of the year. And I haven't looked at any rain forecasts yet, but that's mostly because I don't really trust a rain forecast more than 3 days out. So maybe we'll look at that on Wednesday. Final thing to wrap up the Palisades fire. I've even had some people reaching out to me asking where to find the damage assessment maps, because one thing I will emphasize is even though there's not a lot of activity recently on these fires, what I've been talking about is they're getting crews in there to try to mop it up and secure it. So the last thing they want is people moving back into these evacuation zones where then they have to divert some of their resources to deal with people. The best thing that you could do to help CAL FIRE would be to keep paying attention to the evacuation orders, so then they could make sure that this fire doesn't flare back up as the winds pick up. And then just talking about the damage assessment map, I put the link to this in the description of this video. And what you can do with this is click in here. If you see red, that is completely destroyed. Orange is, I forget the exact percentage for damage, and then black is going to be no damage whatsoever. And then you're actually able to click into the home, look at a photo, and it'll show what it looks like. So in some cases that's going to be pretty hard to see, but I know one of the worst things is just waiting and not knowing what happened. So hopefully that'll be a useful resource for people to use. And once again, that link is in the description. And then finally with the Eaton fire, I was actually partially worried for a second today because I saw 2 very large air tankers and 6 Type 1 large air tankers have been requested to the incident per air attack. And that was 2 hours ago. So I started getting worried of, is it flaring back up again? So I check over here. We go up to the Eaton fire. And if we click over here, it actually shows if there's any current heat detections. And we're not seeing anything on the Eaton fire. So then I watched their report that they did. There was a community meeting. And it seems like they requested the air tankers so that they could drop some retardant, just to almost use it as a containment line a little bit, especially on that northern side. So Eaton fire, I mean, no worries at the moment. But as with all of these fires, we have some windy conditions on the way. We're going to be watching the weather forecast closely and also watching closely to make sure that nothing flares back up and that no new fires start. If anything does happen, I'll do another one of these updates as soon as I can. So hopefully this video was helpful. We'll be keeping all the people of Southern California in our thoughts and prayers, and we'll also just be praying that no new fires start. We've certainly had enough at this point. So hopefully this was helpful, and thanks for watching.